Greetings, Mandrake Road family. So we are just now getting towards the end of a particular point. We're going to be looking at another Old Testament text for our Sabbath class slash discussion this week, and we're going to be looking at Nehemiah. We'll be in chapter 13, verses 15 through 22. Next week, we're going to start looking at New Testament texts and beginning actually with the end of Romans. But I'll talk a little bit more about that next week on why we're going to Romans. But so we're going to talk a little bit about, we're going to continue looking at Sabbath more as a concept here, and what exactly is the Old Testament, what is God looking for as far as practicing the Sabbath. And so this will lead very well into what we're going to be talking about in when we look at the New Testament text. We're going to be in the Gospels mostly. Next week will be really the only day or the only week that we look at a text from Paul. And then we'll focus on the Gospels, and then we'll actually return to Genesis 2 at the conclusion of our series. So that's a few weeks away. But I'm going to go ahead and read the Nehemiah text, and we'll discuss that a little bit. In those days I saw in Judah people treading winepress on the Sabbath, and bringing in heaps of grain, and loading them on donkeys, and also wine, grape, figs, and all kinds of loads, which they brought into Jerusalem on the Sabbath day. And I warned them on the day when they sold food. Tyrians also, who lived in the city, brought in fish and all kinds of goods, and sold them on the Sabbath to the people of Judah in Jerusalem itself. Then I confronted the nobles of Judah and said to them, "What is this evil thing that you are doing, profaning the Sabbath day? Did not your fathers act in this way, and did not our God bring all this disaster on us and on this city? Now you are bringing more wrath on Israel by profaning the Sabbath." As soon as it began to grow dark at the gates of Jerusalem before the Sabbath, I commanded that the doors should be shut, and gave orders that they should not be opened until after the Sabbath. And I stationed some of my servants at the gates, that no load might be brought in on the Sabbath day. Then the merchants and sellers of all kinds of wares lodged outside Jerusalem once or twice. But I warned them and said to them, "Why do you lodge outside the wall? If you do so again, I will lay hands on you." From that time on, they did not come on the Sabbath. Then I commanded the Levites that they should purify themselves and come and guard the gates, to keep the Sabbath day holy. Remember, this is also in my favor, O my God, and spare me according to the greatness of your steadfast love. So it would be easy to focus on, when you look at the end of the text, or when he says that, is this what our did not your fathers act in this way? Did they not profane the Sabbath? And did not God bring all this disaster on us and on this city? And it would be easy, right, in a post-exile situation, which Nehemiah is, to ask this type of question. And so, but I think what's really interesting here is is the question of what is being pushed back upon here by Nehemiah. Because could we not also ask the question that if there are people guarding the gates, would that not be considered work to some degree? And so there are some questions here that lead us to believe that the actual conducting of business, coming in, opening the market, or actually working in a field, or something along the lines of treading wine presses, which is quite a bit of work, right? That's, but this would have involved several things that we see, that the fourth commandment in Exodus and Deuteronomy tell us is that you are to give your children, your servants, your slaves, and your livestock. They're all to have rest on this day. So we have here people who are treading the wine presses are most likely people who work for, say, a landowner. And it might be the landowner or his family, and so that's a situation and then we also see that the bringing in heaps of grain and loading them on donkeys, and also wine and grapes and figs, and so we see that commandment is being broken. And so the question is, as we think about this idea of how Sabbath in the Ten Commandments actually demonstrates a merging of the love of God and the love of neighbor, how might that lens help us understand this text? Well, it's that they're not resting. They're not taking a prescribed time that God has said this is what Israel will do for all time. And so, as we've talked about, we have a lot of phrases in our culture for work and for accruing wealth and things like that. Time is money. Someone always says, I'm always hustling. I'm always trying to make a dollar. And we have those phrases, right? And so I think that's something we kind of see what's happening here is something that during the farming season I used to hear a lot, and from various people, was that the crops don't stop growing and the water doesn't stop running on Sundays. And because a lot of people where I participated in farming wanted to go to church, wanted to do things on Sundays. And so now where I was at, we didn't do certain types of work, but the water still had to be changed. It still had to be moved. And any catastrophe, a wheel line gets loose or whatever it is, had to be taken care of. It had to be taken care of then. It couldn't wait until the next day. And so, we do see that, especially in an agrarian society, that in this case, Sabbath is just another day. It's a day to make money, to produce and to consume. And that's what I think we see Nehemiah pushing back against. Because as we talked about, that was the way Pharaoh dealt with Israelites. They had to continually do more work and produce more, even as their loads were increased. And so we see that the Sabbath here it's resisting that very notion. It's resisting the idea that this anxiety to continually produce and to continually consume. And as we've said, we talked about this last week, that this is the idea of the fear of missing out. And so I think we see that here. If people are working 7 days a week and they're showing up on the Sabbath to open the markets, to sell their wares and all of that, and not only that, in Jerusalem itself, which would have been the place to do so, right? It's the center of Israel. It's where there would have been a lot of people coming in and out for various reasons. And so when we see this, is that there's a sense of resisting this idea of constantly needing to produce and consume. And as you can see, Nehemiah said they showed up outside the gates and just kind of hung out there. They stayed there and they waited. And Nehemiah was like, if you keep doing that, we're gonna have to throw down. And fun phrase, I will lay hands on you. In Hebrew, it really doesn't say it that nicely, but it's a really interesting scene. And so, the fear of what God might do, but it's also the notion of recognizing what God has done, that upon leaving Egypt, God said, you don't have to work 7 days. And on the seventh day, I will provide for you. Just as I've been providing you the other 6 days, I will provide for you that day. When it comes to the seventh year, you are to allow the land to rest. I will provide for you. And so we're seeing that here, and this isn't just a blind kind of idea, there are several provisions that could be made as a part of that. But the notion here is that for a people that's traveling through the wilderness to the promised land, right? Rest is going to be important. And the same goes for land, as we talked about. Letting a field lie fallow allows it to replenish itself. And so when we look at this, is what we're seeing here is that there's no rest, and there's this anxiety about producing and consuming. And this is where I think Sabbath really gives us a sense of helping us to think about our own world and our own culture. And this is something that we deal with on a regular basis. And so when I played baseball, the idea of taking a rest day was foreign to many of my teammates, because if you weren't out there working, someone else was. Someone else was working harder than you to get to the top. And so for me, I always had this sense that any time that I wasn't working on something, I was getting worse and someone was getting better. And that's our system. Schools are this way. Jobs are this way. They're what we would call adversarial, right? They're competitive. And so what do you do in an ancient society, agrarian society? You can't take a break. But the God of Israel, Yahweh, is not the God that God demonstrates God to be. And so I think this shows the resistance of, one, in our world, we could think of this as something like maybe instant gratification. And that we struggle with patience, right? And we say, well, I would like to get this thing. And we take out lines of credit, and we that are not in a very good situation. There are several systems in which you can get money that have a high return for the one who's giving you the money, and that's being used. And so this is the idea of producing and consuming. And many of us can go down in our basements or in our backyards, in our pantries, and see the amount of stuff that has been produced that's just in our own house, but that we have consumed. And that would look very different in other parts of the world. And so we fall into this trap. Our entire culture falls into this trap. And I think Sabbath helps us think a little differently about how we can engage this particular idea in our own world. And so something I think about is, as we think about this, of responsible economic practices or responsible economic engagement. And so here, part of this is that, again, let's just say employees, the servants or children, or even the landowners themselves, but also their cattle, and but also the inhabitants of the city, they're not practicing Sabbath, and this is quite in violation of the fourth commandment that we see in the Ten Commandments, and so this is a situation where in our own world, and as we talk about instant gratification, is on Sundays. I don't think of Sunday as a new Sabbath day. It can be that, and we can see it that way, but it's also one of during certain times of the year for us, it's also one of the busiest days. We always make jokes that we have to beat the Baptists to lunch on Sundays, and that's something that is, we end up in places sometimes. I remember on Mother's Day, I was probably 8 or 9. We went to a restaurant in town, and it was just packed full of people. And my dad was so angry that we didn't get there in time, because that's where my mom wanted to eat. It wasn't that big of a deal. to my mom, but it was one of those where we went to church and that should have meant something for us. Then we should have been able to get in or skip the line or whatever. And it was one of those kind of strange moments. But we have those little phrases, and sometimes we think they're funny, but it shows the chaotic pace of our own world and our own culture. And so this brings to mind during this time is what would responsible economic practices look like? And these aren't just, as we're going to talk, Sabbath helps give us an idea of what it looks like to spend money in a way that would be responsible, and to think more intentionally about the way we spend money. And one of the things I've been seeing during the time of the COVID-19 crisis is, what do we do with small businesses? And many of them are suffering, and it's something that many will close. There's a projection that if we continue at the rate we're continuing, as much as 52% of small businesses could close in 6 months. Now, the statistics were taken in the middle of April, so it's changed. Places are slowly lifting some of the restrictions. So many of those businesses are now open in some capacity, and so and those are good things. But these are things we do need to think about. And so something that in my own, when this started, this is something that my wife and I sat down and we asked questions about: how can we best spend our money in a responsible way? And so we order coffee from a friend who has a nonprofit in Denver. It's called Purple Door Coffee. Now, the coffee I buy, I get coffee every 2 weeks, and the amount that I spend for that every 2 weeks is about $5 more than I would spend otherwise. Now, $15 or $10 a month adds up over time, which, sure, but his nonprofit helps homeless teens and young adults get work experience, and that's something. He is a small business owner, also a friend, that I'm willing to spend a little extra to help what I think is an important cause, but also I think that extra $5 is much more well spent than it is saved for whatever else that $5 might be used for. But also, as we think about small businesses and buying local, so on Tuesdays, wife and I do what's called Takeout Tuesdays, and we have a list of local restaurants that we spend our money at to help them during this time. And while occasionally we don't eat out a whole lot, but occasionally we will eat out at other times of the week, we will get food from other places. We try very intentionally to shop at. We try to get food from places that are local and are privately owned by local people, and we try to avoid chains. And it's not that chains aren't a good thing; they provide jobs and they provide various things for the culture we live in. But we're trying to do our best to contribute in whatever small way we can to the small local businesses here in Madison. And so there are other ways that we've discussed this. So buying gift certificates or gift cards from local businesses or other merchandise, I think is a good practice. And I think Sabbath helps us think about that. That business is not a utilitarian matter. That loving your neighbor is being intentional about how we do engage our own economic systems. And, Walmart and larger grocery chains are very important during this time to keep things going. But we can't forget that there are people who miss large portions of their income as a small business when they are out of business for that amount of time. And so this is a matter of when we look at this would be a matter of loving your neighbor and being intentional and reflecting on exactly how we participate in our own neighborhoods and in our own communities. And so that is, I hope as we talk this week, we can talk about that and we can think about this idea as we're shifting from Sabbath, this idea of being some sort of Old Testament, will they or won't they practice law, and more of something that helps us think about how God would desires creation to interact and engage together. And so regardless of whatever economic system there is that there is always a situation where those who are in those types of positions, small, say in our situation, small business, a small grocery store, a small restaurant, whatever that business is that they normally can't compete on at normal times, but in times of crisis they can't either. And so when we get to times of crisis, we can intentionally really reflect on our own habits. But then when we get back into times of normalcy, we can continue those practices. And so I think that's something that I hope as we start talking about Jesus and what Jesus thinks about Sabbath, that because Jesus practiced Sabbath, we can talk about what it looks like for Sabbath to become a regular part of our own lives, not just a time of rest, but what does it look like to reflect on the God who rests after creating for 6 days? What does it look like to reflect on Jesus, who says he is Lord of the Sabbath, but practices it? And so those are the types of things that we are going to get into over the next few weeks. And so I hope you'll join me. I hope you have a great week, and we'll talk to you later.